So let me just, before I can exert the great honor and pleasure of introducing the other members of the panel, I just wanted to introduce I will introduce at least the topic of the panel, which Trygve rightly called innovation more than commercialization, ? So let me first just comment by, I see that I'm in the program, I'm sort of listed as professor at the University of Bergen, which I guess is because I haven't done enough in my work as adjunct professor at Center for Digital Life, Norway at NTNU. But anyway, I wanted to just remind everybody that we are at the annual conference of the Center for Digital Life, and that the Center for Digital Life indeed has a formal answer to the question of whether innovation is more than commercialization or not, given in the original paper, Convergence for Innovation. So in that sense, the question is a no-brainer. Is innovation more than commercialization? And the answer is yes, actually. So in that sense, we can all now go.
Okay.
There is, however, more to say about that, and I'll just remind us what Digital Life says about it. It says, first of all, that the aim of the Center for Digital Life is to create economic, societal, and environmental value for Norway, meaning more than cash. It also says biotechnological innovation results from the complex co-production of technological advances, politics, and societal values. This was written at a time when there was quite a lot of social science expertise at the Research Council of Norway, and I'm sure there still is. Speaking of which, I will now introduce the members of the panel, in addition to myself. So we have at my side here, Koch, who is editor and special advisor at, let's see if we get it right, the Nordic Institute for Studies of Innovation, Research and Education.
Sounds good.
Very good. With 30 years of experience in innovation, Norwegian research and innovation policy, and also internationally, from the Research Council of Norway, Innovation Norway, and the Ministry of, it's not called the Ministry of Truth, Kunnskapsdepartementet, it's the Ministry of Higher Education and Research, I believe. We have then Randi Elisabeth Takst, who is a senior advisor in innovation and industry development at the Center for Digital Life Norway, and probably also quite a few other things. And for those who are among the sort of local groupies here, you will know Randi because she has worked in many capacities at the University of Bergen and also at our local TTO, which currently is called VIS, I believe. I still think of it as BTO, but it doesn't matter. And last, but definitely not least, we have Professor Jim Lawrence from the Department of Biomedicine, previously the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, correct, I believe, yeah, at the University of Bergen. And he's also one of the principal investigators at the Center for Cancer Biomarkers at the University of Bergen. And as we will come to hear, has his own personal experiences in biotech innovation, perhaps not quite so exciting as the talk we heard about the wastewater, but still quite exciting. I still have to think about many of the diseases that we saw in the skunk pox, for instance. I'm really intrigued what that is that we saw in one of the slides, but we get to ask that question, I guess. Okay, we get to the topic now, and Randi, it's also true that you recently defended a PhD on knowledge transfer, obstacles for innovation, etc., in academic public universities. So she has promised to give us now a sort of 3-hour lecture on the concept and history of innovation. So I give the word to you.
Thank you, Roger. Yes, I always use the opportunity to be lecturing here as a new PhD. I always have interest in research and research policy. Always been, since I was a student, actually. And rather recently, which means the last 10 to 15 years, I've been interested in innovation and innovation policy. But what is in our head when we talk about innovation? In my experience, it's a lot of pictures, and I guess there's a lot of different pictures in your head now when I talk about innovation. What is innovation? So I have been granted the honor to make the definition. And I would say that innovation is when an idea, whether it comes from research or from everything else, is implemented in the society. It's not enough to have an idea, then it's an invention. So you have to, the idea has to be implemented, it has to be realized in the society. And it can be different, it can be a product, it can be a good, it can be a service, and it can be actually a new marketing method or actually an organizational new way, but they have to be new and it have to be implemented. Then it is an innovation. And many, and I would say many, perhaps not you in the audience here, but very many when I'm dealing with people in my profession, and is kind of confusing innovation with commercialization, because commercialization is when you want to make money out of your idea, which I work with commercialization of research and research, but I think it's very good. It's very good for the society if you are able to commercialize your idea, but it's not the only way to realize research within the society. It also can have impact in other ways than commercialization. So the problem, in my opinion, is that this confusion, because commercialization always pop up when we talk about innovation, and that's a pity, because you have to kind of distinguish these two without making one or the other a bit more weighted. So I've been always puzzled by the resistance from the academia towards innovation and commercialization. That's always puzzled me, and that's why I want to take on this PhD. And I've also been puzzled by the lack of funding for research-based innovation. Actually, the Research Council might probably say it's not true, but I say it's a huge gap. So, and I also puzzled how much we talk about innovation and commercialization without actually doing it. So.
Yeah, and on that note of talking about it, were you done, by the way?
What I have done?
Were you done now? Was that the lecture, or?
Well, I can give you a couple of reasons why we have these problems. And I think one of the problems is that we are confusing innovation with commercialization, is that many researchers, and I have also studied this, are not motivated enough by economic incentives. And I think it was a very good example we had in the former here, excellent examples. And in the early stage of an idea, you don't know whether you're going to be an impact idea or it's going to be a commercial idea. But you have to work with it anyway. You can't just throw the research out there and say, I have disseminated in publication, so please use it. It's actually not very useful. You have to work with it. You have to. And I think that also we need some more funding. So, but I will leave that but and finally, Roger, our society is in this transition where the economic incentives is not that important anymore. We have big problems to solve, and research is very important. So we have to take care of both the impact research and the commercialization activities. So that's my final comment from now.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Jim, you have your personal experience in various capacities.
So yeah, I gather the reason I'm sitting here is because I have a couple of experiences in the last 30-ish years, both from the Stanford and Bay Area biotech, and also then returning to another West Coast here in Bergen and starting a lab and spinning out a company. So If I go back actually to the Stanford time, this was sort of the heady days of the 90s. You remember them, Olga. And there was, at that time, basically everybody was going to start a company. So Facebook, Stanford, it was Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, people like that were all over the place. And I do remember, sitting and talking to students. I was a senior postdoc researcher at that point. And these, the kids would come in and they want to start companies. I said, yeah, that's great, but you don't know how to do anything yet. So you have to spend some time, learning how to be a scientist before you can actually start coming up with the inventions which form the basis. But I did, at that time, have the experience of spinning out a company from this lab that I worked at in Stanford. I was involved in the technology development, became a company based in South San Francisco, down the street from a place called Genentech. And so that was quite and I was there 7, 8 years before I came back here. And this was a very traditional sort of Bay Area venture capital, very intense, so things moved quickly, people worked a lot, and was very exciting. But it was also, I have to say, the transition from an academic to a sort of an industrial position was not without its challenges, and I thought it was well said by one of my collaborators that, now I'm doing hit and run science because you have no time to go in depth. You have to move things, forward very quickly. So I ended up coming to Bergen, rebooting completely to an academic position, but had the opportunity then to spin out a company called Bergen Bio in sort of 2008 and 09. And this was also during a heady time with Fuga and a lot of good funding. The Research Council was excellent. The FNI program had started. And so I think the lesson from Bergen Bio is that we followed all the rules. Actually, BTO, the local TTO, was the first place we went to with the idea, and we followed the trajectory. The company is still going and testing drugs so the goal of the company was to test new cancer therapeutics, which it has done. So what I can say about that experience is that, we checked a lot of boxes because this was commercialization, but the goal of being able to take a drug into the clinic, somebody had to pay for that. And this costs hundreds of millions of kroners. And so you are reliant on the private sector funding to accomplish that. It's very difficult, impossible for public organizations to afford that kind of development cost, and that's something to keep in mind. So if we're talking about an app development, lower capital investment as opposed to, say, a drug development, which is at the total high end of the scale, there are considerations when you're thinking about how this can actually occur. And we can talk some more about this along the way, but in general, I think it's important to remember that the minute that you go into commercialization, as Landi's saying, it's a different beast. It's very different to be working with the commercialization of an idea, reducing it to practice than the actual development. And often it takes little different sides of the brain to be able to accomplish these things. So.
Thank you. Yeah. And Peter, you have seen this from the other side. I was almost going to say, actually, several other sides. What would you like to share with us?
Well, I'm one of those who find the word commercialization very difficult. And the reason for that is that it has an implicit narrative, or most often it has an implicit narrative. And that narrative is, as many of you know, the linear model. It's like, you're the researcher now, university researchers, and I'm the industrialist. And you have a great idea, and you give me this idea, and then I turn it into something sellable, something profitable. And then I build a big company out of this, or many companies, and you have increase in employment and taxes and God knows what, and everything is good. You have replaced the oil and gas industry with this brilliant idea. But in fact is that innovation research shows us that this is not how innovation takes place normally. We see that most companies actually innovate without research, which is good. They don't need it. And then you have a lot of companies that actually, the innovation process is focused in the company. And it's not that you give me the pen, it's I come to you and ask you, do you have something that can give me a pen that actually solves this problem? And then we collaborate. expert to expert. Now, the biotech field is a little bit different than many other disciplines because it is very focused on basic research, right? So you normally have an interaction with companies that are also capable of using basic research. That is, companies that do research themselves. But still, I think that the commercialization concept, again, is misleading. Even though you have spin-offs, you have TTOs, and you have all those linear tools that are actually put in place in order to move the pen over to this one. But even spin-offs or TTOs are actually also tools that are used to co-learning, co-creation between companies and universities. So I think that the concept is misleading, and it leads policymakers to focus on the wrong things. Instead of focusing on co-learning, co-creation, collaboration, inspiration, they are focusing on very technical things of, getting rid of the barrier that's here. And most often there is no barrier here. I can call you. But following up on that, there's also a very interesting thing in the Norwegian context, because you can see that biotech is, there are two types. You have two types of industry. On the one hand, you have pharmaceutical industry, which we don't have. And on the other hand, you have the food industry, aquaculture, agriculture, fisheries, food processing. And we have some really good companies there. So in the one field, you have a possibility of collaboration that will lead to increased profits, increased taxes, and employment. In the other one, you are losing it because the companies are normally not Norwegian at all. And then you can say, well, then you get rid of that part of biotech because we don't need it. And I would say, this is where you take a deep breath and start thinking. It's not only about profits and employment. It's actually about helping the world become a better place. So, damn it. If the Americans profit from this and they do the right thing, maybe it's okay.
I already have tons of questions, but I see that Jim wants to, and also we are sort of, I'm not saying that you're senior, but we have somehow sent all the juniors somewhere else on the other side of the wall, I believe. So it means that we have, a room full of 30 years of experience. It's not just we who have known each other for 30 years. We have all known each other for 30 years. So also just prepare to make your own contributions that can be in the form of an experience rather than a question as well. But first, Jim.
Yeah, so I can maybe just as a follow-up. So when I came to Norway and started considering the possibility of spinning out a company, I mean, the actual goal was that we had a technology discovery and invention that we thought was useful, and I had experience of doing that. So I built on that experience to accomplish that. But I have to say that one of the drivers was clearly job creation. I mean, that was from the government official point of view. That was the fact that we were going to create jobs for academics was a huge part of this, and which we did, to be fair. So, but I think that it's important to consider, exactly as you're saying. Well, we could have licensed this idea to a big American company, for example, or German company, Swiss company. That wouldn't have created jobs in Norway. It would create perhaps revenue, hopefully revenue, and the end result may be the same, that patients could be helped in this particular case. But at the end of the day, it depends a lot on who's driving this and their motives. So, from my experience, you have venture capital, and so these are not altruistic people. So they want to make money, but the good part of it is that they take risk. And that's what you need for these high-risk, high-reward types of projects, which we're talking about, and that's where we often fall between the chairs when we're trying to finance this. So,
Randi.
Yes, totally agree. And just a comment about the linear, which I share with you, that innovation is not linear and is a high risk. And I think one of the major mistakes we have done in Norway and perhaps also in other countries is that we have created TTOs that are purely made as economic tools for making, just for commercialization. So you are missing out a lot of opportunities from the early stage because the TTOs are only dealing with the ideas that are commercial valid. So we miss out on the other side. So we have a gap where a lot of the impact ideas fall in and are not used. So that's also one of my conclusions for my PhD.
Can I just ask you a little question about that, since you also have the hat of being an innovation senior advisor, right, in Digital Life Norway. So I don't know if this is the time and place to tell all the details about the innovation roadmap and all of this stuff, but isn't that part of the idea of Digital Life Norway, to try to fill in at least a little part of that gap?
Yes. Shortly. And it's needed, and it's definitely needed. But Digital Life can only fill for the 48 projects we have in Digital Life. So the institutions need to think about it. And I think also the government and the institution needs to change the mandate for the TTOs to also deal with impact projects, because it's early phase, it's high risk, and somebody has to do it.
Did I see any hands, by the way, yet? I did. So Ole Johan, you have a...
Thank you. I really enjoy being here. I think the comments you're making, they're extremely interesting. I would like to address one thing. I'm from the Research Council of Norway. We invest 750 million every year in innovation in health to the entire community, 400 roughly million towards the companies directly. In addition to that, it comes, of course, all the projects we have working with innovation without a commercial scope. If I were pushed, I would say that there is too much money for innovation. And the reason why I'm saying that is that there are too many projects working on similar things. And those projects, they are not collaborating enough. They are actually competing, not directly, but they are competing against attention. They are competing against first to the market, but for instance, a municipality that has an innovation project will never buy a product that is developed on a different innovation project than what that is similar to the one they are running themselves. Meaning that one innovation project is actually blocking the other ones to develop further. So I don't agree actually that it's not that the funding is a problem with being too scarce. Thank you.
I'm dying to ask Per a question about this, but let's hear Anders Brode Johansen first.
I have to stand as well? All right. So I'm currently the center manager of Digital Life Norway. So I'll try not to ask Randi, who is my colleague, a question. This is more maybe a question for Per. So as I just could contrast the Research Council's position on this, I have a fundamentally different take, or potentially a question to this, and that's, okay, there are at least as many theories about how to facilitate innovation, research-based innovation, as there are actors in the Norwegian innovation ecosystem. My impression is that there's one camp that says, oh, we need to teach the researchers how to understand the market and the real world. They have a lot of assumptions. And there's all these kind of policy and strategies towards that. And I've heard a lot of them. The other side, just to quote Nassim Taleb, who's the author of Black Swan, he says, trying to teach researchers to reach their kind of societal impact in a better way is trying to teach birds how to fly. And that's a little bit of the different kind of understanding of innovations. I was wondering, Per, where do you stand on that side?
The others will get the question as well, but you can go first.
I think, well, basically, when you are a scientist, right? You're produced by the university system, you're focusing on publishing, on doing experiments or whatever. This is what you do, this is your skill, this is what you're good at. And ask people like that who have never been in touch. I mean, they've been in touch with industry all the time, but they're not really industrialists. They're not business people. That's not their skill. Their skill is to do research in collaboration with Roger here, but still, it's like, that's their task. So I would say that is where you should focus, not on making scientists industrialists. But then again, you can say, hey, we have a lot of examples in this room of scientists who have become, I don't know, business owners, right? So it works. Yeah, it does work sometimes, but I don't think you're a representative for the whole biotech science environment, or you. I don't think so. So I think that, yeah, if it works, but don't push them. So that's my answer to that.
You want to follow up on this?
Well, I mean, absolutely. So I think that it's important that for budding entrepreneurs to understand what they're getting themselves into, right? And what is it? What drives you? What are you interested in? I mean, and exactly as you say, I mean, good scientists will be doing good science. So, and I think it's important not to be naive about the trials and tribulations of, at least in the commercialization, because you're creating a business, and that's always going to have a completely different set of drivers. So case in point, I would go, when I was sort of full-time I spent some time full-time in the company, I would go to scientific meetings. I would not go to a single session, because I was in business meetings all the time. So there's science discussions, we're talking about science, but it's science in the sense of talking to an investor or talking to a potential customer, which would be, for example, a pharmaceutical company in my case. So I think that and of course that's important. And it was important that I participated in that, because you need people who understand it to explain it to people. But I think that it's important also if you're considering doing this, what it is you're getting yourself into. I think that's important.
Randi, you get to comment on this. I will also comment actually after you, and then there are more questions from the audience.
I just want to comment very briefly on, is there enough funding? I don't disagree with you. It's a lot of funding for innovation, actually in Norway. It's a lot of funding and especially if you define applied research as innovation, like SFEs. But if you go through the Research Council and other funding schemes, there is a distinct gap for a researcher who wants to move from basic or applied research towards development of their idea. And that's a huge gap, and it's there. But I guess this calls for a beer, and we shall not use. so let's. I would love to take that discussion further.
Pere, did you have a short remark there, or?
A very short one. I mean, obviously, scientists will never be satisfied with the amount of money given to them. So that's just the way it is. And we are even getting out more students, more scientists, so it never ends. Yeah. But I think that what you're pointing to is more a question of allocation of the money. There is, for instance, a very good discussion about to what extent scientists sitting in the boards of the Research Council are creating a kind of lock-in into the biggest environments, because the professors are there and they are interested in their own ideas, not the ones of the young ones who are not here.
So I will make a short comment, misusing my privilege here as moderator before we move on. And I don't really need a beer to have that discussion, because I think that we have distinguished guests here who are not Norwegian, who came from different types of countries with different type of political systems and economic systems. So just to remind everybody that Norway is a centralist socialist state, right? Which means that whenever we use words as innovation, they may refer to actual innovation, they may refer to theories of innovation, and they may refer to policy concepts that trigger and release subsidies. Yeah. Which can be used for absolutely honorable purposes, but where what is actually going on doesn't have to have anything more to do with that concept than the ability of whoever is writing the proposal to subsume the activity under the call. And that can be innovation, it can be climate change, it can be anything, especially health. Yeah. And over the beer, we can discuss cancer and heart diseases and stuff like that. Anyway, we have a question there.
Thank you. Nathalie Reuter, University of Bergen. And I've been trying to do innovation. So this discussion is very interesting. I'm going to take it back down to a very concrete hindrance. You've talked about several structural hindrances. Funding is one of them. One that I've heard Randi mention before and that we're all painfully aware of are the people who are on the other side of the wall. So we have to do innovation, and I'm thinking particularly in medical biotech, where the timelines are extremely long. We are doing innovation in academia with PhD students and postdocs who need publications, but we can't really publish all we have, right? And that triggers another problem related to researchers doing innovation, is how do we educate young researchers to do innovation when we don't really have the mean? We have the structural hindrance of who we can hire, for how long we can hire people. And we don't really have, in drug discovery, we don't really have a technological platform where we could, hire people to work on a project for 3 months or 6 months with the money and the timeline we have on milestones project, for example. So that's another hindrance. Put it on the table. I'd like to hear your experience from other countries, or if you have ideas.
And I think you're talking about Jim's life here and Randi's PhD.
So I can maybe say a couple. So one thing. So there certainly are EU-funded platforms and organizations. So I'm aware of. I think it's called C3 or CD2, which is in Leuven, which is a drug discovery unit, and they're funded by the European Union fund. And so they'll take projects, drug discovery projects from all over Europe and pick the best ones. And then they have a center with 40 medicinal chemists and all the infrastructure to take that idea and move it forward, at least in that kind of setting. So, and I was a consultant on a couple of projects, excellent projects, by the way, and I thought that was very cool. And what's interesting about that, from my perspective, is that when I worked in the Bay Area, Stanford, et cetera, there are, for example, medicinal chemist screening opportunities all over the place. So exactly as you're saying, you have that kind of infrastructure. Coming back to Bergen, so now 20 years ago, didn't exist and still is tricky. So you need to be able, I think in practical terms, it's take advantage of the opportunities, for example, through the EU funded centers, for example, because it's difficult to build that kind of expertise. In particular, something like, for example, medicinal chemistry, the vast majority of medicinal chemistry is actually done in companies. So most medicinal chemists, for example, work in companies. So one possibility is, so either you can go through some of these platforms with academic funding, or if you have an idea, you can go to a company that's perhaps interested. So I know companies are very happy to talk to academics with good ideas, and that could be a good strategy. So, and let them do the work to develop that compound, for example. Yeah.
Didn't we also used to hand out scholarships through Digital Life Norway to help with this problem? Yeah. We do all sorts of good things, really. I mean, it's. Randi, would you like to have a quick one on this, or should we?
I can just agree. We lack this kind of infrastructure, and I would like to see that we could at least build a small. I have a wish that we could have a small infrastructure in Norway to start with, at least to qualify for this EU.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, it's only 3 hours left now, but we will move on. We have at least 2 more questions or comments from the audience. And so it's Anban Shah.
Is it okay? You hear me? Yeah. Thank you. It's super nice so far. I'm enjoying it a lot. I was wanting to come back to this linear narrative of innovation that we were talking about at the beginning. And I wondered, so the linear assumption of innovation that is kind of misleading because we focus on technical details and then we can think about in terms of like techno fixes or whatever. So that overshadows some kind of important discussions. But there's also another narrative that is hidden, I feel, which is when we talk about commercialization, we assume that what we commercialize is good, because we can't commercialize something that is not good, or that would be very difficult to sell. So I wonder to what extent this heavy focus on commercialization is also misleading, because we're not talking or thinking about the potential side effects that come with the devices or whatever that are sold.
And thank you for not mentioning uranium-enriched ammunition that we read about in the newspaper today. But Pierre, perhaps you would like to comment on...
I think you're spot on. And one of the reasons that this is happening, apart from the lock-in in the political system, that it's nice to talk about science in a good way, always. But of course, also university researchers like the narrative because it's so easy to use it to get more money back to the research council. And I think that this is a mistake. Although you can see that I love science and I really truly enthusiastic about what I've heard here today, I think that even biotech will ultimately lose if we continue this idea that if you fund science and the science is commercialized, it will always lead to something good. And that will only feed the current skepticism to science that you find like in anti-vaxxers on the irrational side, but also on the rational side saying, God, good God, look what climate change was created by science, so stop pestering us. Let's put an end to this. And I think that would be a huge disaster. So I think it's very important that also scientists and university environment is focusing on not denying this problem, but actually discussing it in a very constructive way. And that is extremely hard because you are talking about the future, and the future doesn't exist. So you need to find ways of talking about something that doesn't exist. And scientists normally don't like that. So, yeah.
And this has been, again, bringing back the, we have had the Center for Digital Life now for how many years, Trygve? 8 years. And some of us are working with innovation and some are working on responsible innovation. And it's like, okay, are we doing... and occasionally we even collaborate, right? So, I mean, that is a good thing. So that we can have innovation that is responsible. Yeah. Ruth gets the word, and then I think I have to, unfortunately, because otherwise you can't go to the spa for your appointment at 4:30. So Ruth, you will be the last one, and I'm sorry for the others who,
Okay, maybe 2 points that touch a bit on the responsible and innovation. So basically, how I understood Natalie's question was, how do we do the innovation with these short milestones? And then Jim's reply was, source it out to other countries. So is it our responsibility as researchers funded from Norwegian taxpayers' money, but Jim also said at the beginning, to create jobs in Norway and build up these infrastructures here? Or is it just our responsibility to get the job done wherever it's possible? And then the other thing, because we talked in the beginning, or you talked about innovation and commercialization, it shouldn't be the same. But how do you innovate if it's not commercially viable? For example, in the field of antibiotics, where these push-pull mechanisms don't work and there's a market failure. So who will pay for the innovation if commercialization is proven to be difficult?
We couldn't have better questions for the final round. I will just remind you and retell them in my own mind. So the last one was the one about market failure and what do we do? For instance, Center for Digital Life has a project in its portfolio about last resort antibiotics. So I doubt that that will be a commercial success in a way. I mean, that is not, it's exactly what they are not supposed to be. And then the first question is, of course, this underlying, in Norwegian, lumre antagelser, the sort of assumption in these policies that about Norwegian job creation and what, in an international science community, is this what it is about, making Norway richer, or what is your responsibilities? Who wants to begin this round?
Well, I can just say maybe, just a couple of things. One is Well, first of all, when I think about innovation, so I think about the fact that PCR was invented in Madison, Wisconsin in 1967 by our former mentor, Kjell Kleppe. He published it in 1971 with Gobind Khorana, two-time Nobel Prize winner, but it was innovated in, so as we define it, in Emeryville, California by CETUS in 1985. And so I think that is a splendid example of the difference of what we're talking about. And so, and in fact, that's a discussion over a beer for that point. But also the fact that that we think about, when we're thinking about this issue of innovation, so what's the goal? So what are we trying to do? Is if it's societal impact, then by all means we should have nonprofit pharmaceutical companies. There are a couple, in fact, that are trying to develop therapies that would be basically sold at cost, for example, for something like tuberculosis. So the antibiotics, for example. So maybe that's what we should be thinking about. And there certainly are models for that type of thing. But at the end of the day, somebody has to pay for it. And so that's always going to be the big question. And venture capital is eager to get involved in a lot of these types of innovations because there's an economic upside, and that's that particular ecosystem, but there are other ways of doing it. So.
Thank you. Who would like to go next, and who wants to have the final word?
I can go next.
Yeah.
Because I will be very brief, because I agree with Jim here. And yesterday there was a pre-event at Digital Live, and where we have an excellent talk from one of the PhDs at the center who were working with future antibiotics, and he was very clear that there will be a need, but there will have to be alternative economic models, and we have to face that in the future. That not everything will be steered by commercial needs. We also need to think about alternative economic models for innovation and commercialization.
Which a country like Norway, as a centralist socialist state, actually could think about, yes. Right? Instead of copycatting other types of systems. Yes. So, Per, you will get the final.
Just a comment to the market failure logic. And to me, market failure is a failure of economics. I mean, they actually think there's a perfect market somewhere, and there isn't. So I would just get rid of that concept and instead say, what do we as a community, at fellesskap, what's our responsibility? And it's not only about economics. It's about so much else, including the global responsibility for creating a better world without diseases. And in that case, it's not really only about creating jobs in Norway, although that's fine, but that's not the main focus, shouldn't be.
Fantastic. It's 4:16 p.m. There has been extensive talk about beers, and we will close this panel now by making you all aware of the possibility of having non-alcoholic beers in the facilities here. And I hand over, I think, the word to my boss at the Center for Digital Life Norway, Professor Trygve Brautaseth.